The story begins not in the skies, but in the quiet streets of Hiroshima in the year 1921. Haruto Miyazaki was not born a soldier. He was born a boy with a fascination for flight. Even as a child, he would spend hours staring at the planes that occasionally streaked across the horizon, dreaming of the freedom of the skies. While other children played with toys or studied the arts of calligraphy and poetry, Haruto would fashion rudimentary gliders from wood and paper, launching them from the roofs of his home and imagining himself soaring above mountains and rivers. Haruto's father, a man of stern principles and rigid discipline, was a former officer in the Imperial Army. He believed that loyalty and honor were the foundation of any man's life. From an early age, he instilled in Haruto a sense of duty, telling him stories of the samurai and their unwavering codes. Yet, there was a gentle contradiction in Haruto, a softness that his father would often mistake for weakness, but which would later define him in ways that no battle could. By the age of 16, Haruto's fascination with aviation had transformed into skill. He excelled in mechanics, learning the intricate workings of engines and aircraft. He could diagnose a failing engine just by listening to its hum, and he could maneuver a glider with a precision that impressed his instructors. When the Japanese Navy Air Corps began recruiting young pilots, Haruto saw his destiny clearly. This was not just a chance to fly, it was a chance to serve his country. Training was brutal. The airfields of Japan were littered with broken planes and the ambitions of young men who failed to survive the rigorous regimen. Haruto endured every trial: dawn flights, night navigation exercises, endless hours of study on aerodynamics and weaponry. His instructors often remarked on his calm demeanor under pressure. Even when his fellow cadets panicked during simulated dogfights or engine failures, Haruto's focus never wavered. He was, by all accounts, a natural.
But even amidst this discipline and war preparation, the boy who once launched paper gliders from rooftops remained alive within him. He remembered the thrill of flight for the sheer joy of it, the awe of watching the clouds stretch endlessly, the serene beauty of the world from above. He carried this memory quietly, a secret rebellion against the violence that the military demanded of him. By 1943, Haruto Miyazaki was no longer a cadet. He was a full-fledged lieutenant, a decorated pilot, and a man whose reputation preceded him in the skies. The Pacific War had escalated. Battles raged from the Philippines to the Solomon Islands. The U.S. Navy's carrier planes and bombers struck with increasing ferocity, and Japanese forces were stretched thin, fighting on multiple fronts with dwindling resources. Each mission carried the weight of survival, patriotism, and the expectation of unwavering obedience. Haruto flew countless sorties. He downed enemy planes, executed daring maneuvers, and survived missions that would have killed lesser pilots. Yet for all his success, there was a growing unease in his heart. He had seen too much death, too many lives extinguished in the blink of an eye. In the heat of battle, he had glimpsed the terror of young American crews as they spiraled from smoke-filled cockpits, terrified and helpless. And though he had never shown it, these images haunted him, not because they were his enemies, but because they were human beings, just like him, caught in the machine of war. The Mariana Islands campaign of 1944 became his proving ground. As American forces advanced, targeting Japanese supply lines and airfields, the stakes reached unprecedented heights. Haruto was assigned to intercept bombers that threatened to cripple his homeland. Every mission was a dance with death, every encounter a test of skill, courage, and resolve. It was during one such patrol over the blue expanse of the Pacific, amidst the roar of engines and the thunder of anti-aircraft fire, that Haruto's life and the lives of a doomed American crew would take an extraordinary turn.
He spotted the bomber first, a B-24 Liberator, limping, smoke trailing from its engines, its crew desperate and panicked. The instinct of a warrior urged him to attack, to fulfill the duty he had trained for his entire life. Yet, in that moment, he hesitated. He saw not a faceless enemy, but a group of men clinging to life. And something inside him, a memory of the boy who once dreamed of flight for joy, not for war, spoke louder than orders, louder than hatred, louder than fear. And so Haruto Miyazaki made a choice that no one could have predicted, a choice that would defy the war itself. The fateful encounter. The morning sun glinted off the waves below, turning the Pacific into a sea of fire and gold. Haruto Miyazaki's Zero fighter cut through the sky like a shadow, silent yet deadly. Every pilot in his squadron knew the stakes. Every mission could be the last. But on this day, something felt different, a tension that wasn't born of danger, but of a choice waiting to be made. Ahead, the American B-24 Liberator appeared, smoke trailing from its right engine. Its once mighty form was battered, wings trembling with each gust of wind. The bomber crew inside struggled with the controls, faces pale, eyes wide with terror. Each man knew that in these skies, mercy was a stranger. They expected only death. Haruto's squadron began to converge. Standard procedure demanded they fire, but Haruto hesitated. Time seemed to slow. He studied the bomber, noticing details no one else would. The scratches on the fuselage, the makeshift repairs, the smoke curling from a torn engine panel. These were not faceless enemies. These were men fighting for survival, not for conquest. Inside the bomber, the crew scrambled. The pilot, Captain James Callahan, barked orders, his hands shaking as he wrestled with the controls. The navigator tried to plot a course to the nearest island, while the bombardier clung to his position, expecting the worst. Every second felt like an eternity. They had been trained for combat, but nothing could prepare them for the sudden, terrifying silence of a Zero circling above.
Haruto's mind raced. He knew that attacking would be easy. He could down the bomber with a single burst of his machine guns. Yet he also knew that doing so would extinguish lives that were already hanging by a thread. His heart, hardened by years of war, fought against his sense of humanity. Memories of his childhood, of flying paper gliders over rooftops, rose to the surface. The first American tracer rounds from distant anti-aircraft fire crackled in the distance, but Haruto ignored them. Instead, he positioned his Zero carefully, shielding the damaged bomber from other incoming threats. His maneuvering was precise, almost protective. The Liberator, once a target, now seemed to glide under an invisible hand, guiding it away from the deadly reefs and jagged rocks of the islands below. Inside the bomber, Callahan noticed the strange behavior of the Japanese fighter. Confusion replaced fear. Could a pilot of the enemy really spare their lives? Every instinct screamed danger, but no shots came. They followed the unspoken guidance, navigating toward a small atoll barely visible on the horizon. Haruto's decision was without risk. His superiors, if they learned of his mercy, would consider him a traitor. One wrong move, and he would be attacked by his own side or court-martialed if captured. Yet he remained steady. Each rotation of his engine, each tilt of his wings was calculated to protect without engaging. It was a dangerous dance, and any moment could spiral into catastrophe. Minutes stretched into eternity. The bomber neared the atoll, and its crew braced for a crash landing. Haruto circled above, ensuring no other fighters or anti-aircraft fire could intercept them. When the Liberator finally touched down on the soft sand, skidding across the coral with a violent shudder, relief flooded the men inside. They were alive. By some miracle, they had survived the impossible. Haruto hovered above, watching from a distance. His heart pounded not from fear, but from a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had defied the unspoken rules of war. choosing mercy over orders, humanity over hatred. And then, just as quietly as he had appeared, he turned his Zero toward the horizon and disappeared into the clouds.
The American crew never forgot the shadow that had guided them to safety. They would later recount the story, speaking in hushed tones about the ghost in the sky who had spared their lives. And in the Japanese Navy, rumors began to circulate about a pilot who had chosen honor over blind obedience, a pilot whose courage was measured not in victories, but in compassion. For Haruto, the war continued, but that morning over the Mariana Islands remained etched in his memory. It was a reminder that even amidst chaos, even when hatred seemed to rule the hearts of men, mercy could still soar. Survival and reflection. The B-24 Liberator lay battered on the sand, its wings scarred and engines silent. Smoke curled into the bright blue sky, but the worst had passed. The American crew stumbled out of the wreckage, knees buckling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Captain James Callahan surveyed the tiny atoll. It was no more than a patch of sand surrounded by the endless Pacific, but it was sanctuary nonetheless, a fragile lifeline in the vast, unforgiving ocean. The crew moved quickly, checking one another for injuries. Minor burns, scrapes, and shock were their only wounds, yet the fear of what could have been pressed heavily upon their hearts. Each man silently acknowledged the presence of a guardian angel, a shadow that had guided them to safety, invisible yet unmistakable. Meanwhile, high above, Haruto Miyazaki watched from a distance. He felt an odd emptiness, a hollow that lingered even after a life had been spared. His decision would not go unnoticed forever. Disobeying orders in the Japanese Navy was a crime punishable by death. Yet he had acted from a principle older than war itself, the belief that honor could coexist with humanity.
Haruto's thoughts drifted to the men on the island. He did not know their names, their lives, or their stories, yet he felt an inexplicable connection to them, a shared vulnerability, a recognition that war did not make enemies of people, but of circumstances. Each life saved was a testament to the truth he had long held close. Even in the heart of battle, compassion was possible. On the island, the American crew salvaged what they could from the wreckage. Radios were broken, supplies were scattered, and hope was fragile. Yet the knowledge that they had survived against all odds brought them a cautious determination. They improvised a makeshift camp, gathered food and water, and tended to minor injuries. Every step was a reminder of the miracle that had delivered them here, the unseen pilot who had chosen mercy over orders. As hours turned to days, the crew struggled with a mixture of fear, relief, and disbelief. They were stranded, isolated, and at the mercy of the elements. Yet the thought of the Japanese pilot's restraint lingered in their minds. They would later recount how a silent guardian had appeared in their darkest hour, giving them a chance to survive when death seemed inevitable. Back in Japan, Haruto returned to base. The faces of his fellow pilots were masks of determination, yet suspicion lingered in their eyes. Whispers circulated, rumors of the pilot who spared the enemy twisting through the ranks like smoke. Some admired his bravery in making a choice of conscience, others condemned it as betrayal. Haruto said nothing. He kept the memory of the encounter close to his heart, a quiet defiance against the machinery of war. In the weeks that followed, the Mariana Islands campaign raged on. Haruto continued flying missions, engaging in battles that tested every ounce of his skill and courage. But beneath the roar of engines and the chaos of combat, he carried a silent resolve. He had glimpsed the power of mercy, and he could never unsee it. Each life he spared, each act of restraint, became a silent rebellion against the hatred that war demanded.
Meanwhile, the story of the Liberator crew spread quietly among the American forces. Tales of a Japanese pilot who had chosen honor over hatred circulated in letters home, in whispered conversations at airfields, and in deep briefings of officers who could scarcely believe what they heard. The world of war was ruthless, yet here was proof that humanity could shine even in the darkest skies. Haruto, however, never sought recognition. He did not desire fame or accolades. His act had been personal, a decision made in the moment between life and death. And yet it would echo through history, a reminder that courage was not measured solely by victories in battle, but also by the compassion one could summon when it mattered most. The war would continue. The Pacific skies would remain a place of fire and fury. But in one brief encounter over the Mariana Islands, a choice had been made that defied logic, expectation, and orders. In the chaos of destruction, mercy had flown, silent, unseen, and unforgettable. Aftermath and moral reckoning. The Mariana Islands faded behind him, but the encounter would never leave Haruto Miyazaki's mind. Each mission thereafter carried the weight of that single unspoken choice. War demanded obedience, yet his conscience demanded something else, something more human. The tension gnawed at him, a constant reminder that courage sometimes meant defying orders rather than following them. Back at base, life in the Japanese Navy continued with its rigid precision. Reports poured in of pilots shot down, of bombers destroyed, of victories that came at terrible cost. Yet Haruto's act remained his secret. His colleagues noticed a change in him, a quiet seriousness in his eyes, a subtle hesitancy in combat that wasn't there before. Rumors began to swirl, whispers of a pilot who had hesitated when he should have struck. Some envied him, some condemned him. To them, mercy in battle was a betrayal, a dangerous deviation from duty.
Haruto did not defend himself. He had no desire for praise, and he feared the consequences of confession. But the memory of the American bomber crew, alive because of him, comforted him in ways that military accolades never could. He understood something that few in war ever truly realize. The greatest acts of courage are not always visible, and the strongest warriors are not always those who killed the most. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the Liberator crew had made their way to safety. Captain James Callahan and his men recounted their story to anyone who would listen. They described a Japanese fighter who had guided them away from death, who had given them a chance to survive when survival seemed impossible. Their words were met with skepticism at first. War was no place for heroism from the enemy, but as the story spread, it became a symbol, a quiet testament to the humanity that could exist even amid hatred. In private, Callahan and his men often wondered about the pilot's motives. Had it been mercy, honor, or a fleeting hesitation? They would never know, but they carried gratitude deep in their hearts. That single act had changed the course of their lives, and the memory of it would never fade. For Haruto, the war continued, and each day brought new battles, new dangers. The skies remained merciless, and every sortie reminded him of the lives lost around him. Yet he carried a secret strength, the knowledge that he had acted according to his own code, even when the world demanded cruelty. That quiet rebellion against the machinery of war became his guiding principle, shaping every decision, every maneuver, every act of courage. In letters home, Haruto wrote rarely, and when he did, he described the war in clinical terms. Missions flown, objectives achieved, comrades lost. But in the private moments, when engines were off and the sky was calm, he remembered the bomber crew on the atoll, their faces etched with relief and disbelief. That memory was a reminder of what war could never take, the human capacity for mercy, honor, and conscience. And in Haruto Miyazaki's heart, a quiet resolution took root. He would continue to fight. He would continue to serve, but he would never allow hatred to blind him. The skies had tested him, and he had discovered something greater than skill or loyalty. The courage to act rightly, even when it was dangerous, even when it was lonely.
It was a moral reckoning that would define him, not just as a pilot, but as a man. And though the war would rage on, one undeniable truth remained. In that fleeting moment over the Mariana Islands, honor had overpowered hatred, and mercy had soared. Legacy and reflection. The war ended, as all wars eventually do. The Pacific skies, once roared with the sounds of engines, gunfire, and explosions, fell silent. The islands were scarred, cities reduced to rubble, and millions of lives forever changed. For most, the end brought relief, but also a deep, haunting sorrow. For Haruto Miyazaki, it brought a quiet reckoning with the choices he had made. Returning to civilian life in Japan was not easy. The nation he came back to was battered, starving, and humiliated, but it was alive, and he had survived. Haruto found himself walking through streets that bore the marks of fire and destruction, the echoes of war in every shattered building and every weary face. He thought often of the bomber crew he had spared. Did they survive the war? Did they know the impact of his actions? The questions lingered, unanswered, yet they were a source of solace and pride that no medal could ever provide.
The sun had barely risen when Haruto climbed into his Zero, the hum of the engine vibrating beneath him like a living pulse. The air smelled of salt and oil, mingling in a haze that made every breath heavy. He adjusted his goggles, feeling the weight of both duty and conscience pressing against his chest. Around him, other pilots prepared, engines roaring in synchronized fury, a symphony of war that would soon turn into chaos. As he ascended, the horizon stretched endlessly, a canvas of deep blue speckled with clouds. The Pacific seemed infinite, yet fragile, as if it could shatter under the weight of conflict. Each patrol carried the same risks: anti-aircraft fire, enemy fighters, storms that came without warning. But Haruto's mind was elsewhere, reflecting on the countless hours he had spent studying flight mechanics, reading maps, memorizing the coastline. Every skill, every maneuver he had learned might now determine not just his survival, but the survival of others. Ahead, the bomber appeared, a lumbering B-24, struggling, smoke curling from its engine like a thin scream into the sky. The men inside were ordinary soldiers, ordinary humans, yet they were caught in the extraordinary machinery of war. Haruto's squadron readied themselves to attack, but a strange quiet fell over him. Time slowed. The roar of engines faded into the background, replaced by the thudding of his own heartbeat, a rhythm that demanded a choice. He remembered the gliders of his childhood, how he had felt the thrill of flight, the awe of seeing the earth stretched beneath him, limitless and free. That memory anchored him, reminding him that the purpose of flight could be more than destruction. It could be protection, guidance, and perhaps mercy. The first shots rang out, distant, scattered, a warning that the chaos of war was ever present. Haruto's hands moved with precision, tilting the Zero to intercept potential threats while avoiding the bomber itself. The Liberator shuddered beneath him, a wounded bird struggling to stay aloft. In those moments, he became not a soldier, but a guardian, navigating the deadly ballet of machine and man. Inside the bomber, the crew was panicked. Captain Callahan barked orders. The navigator frantically tried to adjust the course, and the bombardier gripped his position as the aircraft quaked under the stress of battle damage. Every man's thoughts were a mix of fear, hope, and disbelief. They had no idea who was above them, shielding them from the very forces that had already torn through so many others. But instinct told them survival was near. They could feel it, an invisible hand guiding them towards safety. Haruto adjusted his approach, signaling with subtle maneuvers that no one but he could read.
Each rotation of the propeller, each dip and bank, was a silent promise. Life over death, mercy over orders. Minutes stretched into hours in his mind, though the physical battle lasted only moments. When the bomber finally reached the atoll, skidding violently across sand and coral, relief crashed over the crew in waves. They were alive, spared from the fate that awaited so many others in these skies. And then, Haruto was gone. The Zero vanished into the horizon, leaving only the echo of mercy behind. For him, the act was complete, yet the weight of its implications would linger for years. Every sortie after, every maneuver, every mission carried the shadow of that decision, a moral compass set against the relentless tide of war.